Good morning, everyone. I'm really excited to be here with you today and have this conversation with Kathryn, who's really an amazing woman in the space of sports and advocacy. So I have a little bit of an introduction to cue her up and tell you a bit about her background, and then I'm going to pass it to her to tell you more of her story. Please do, as Jay said, ask questions along the way. I have some queued up, but we really want to hear what your thoughts are and what you want to know more about Kathryn's story. So with that said, Kathryn Bertine got her start in sports as a competitive turned pro figure skater. After skating, she turned to triathlons and raced at the pro level. She was hired by ESPN to explore the question, what does it take for an elite athlete, to get to the Olympics? Kathryn chose cycling as her sport and documented her firsthand experience on the road to becoming an Olympic athlete. She didn't quite make the Olympics, but during the way, she discovered her passion for the sport. She embarked on a personal challenge to then become a pro cyclist in a sport that was far from equitable for women, and at that time, pretty inhospitable to women over the age of 30. So through sheer grit and determination, she succeeded in her goal of going pro. Along the way, the flame of activism was lit within her, and she formed an activist group to pressure the Tour de France to include women. By 2014, this goal came to fruition with the introduction of La Course by Tour de France, but not without significant challenges along the way. Using her platform as a professional athlete and journalist, she shares her journey of affecting change and competing in the most famous cycling race in the world in her just-released new book, Stand, a memoir on activism and a manual for progress. I've got the book here in my hand. I'm really excited for this conversation. And without further ado, I would like to turn this over to Kathryn so she can tell us a little more about her story. And I'll be back when she's done. Start asking her questions along the way. And I really look forward to this conversation. So Kathryn, take it away.
Rachel, thank you so much. Jay, thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. I'm thrilled to speak to the Pulse attendees and to UCLA. I think it's tremendous what you're doing to give us a platform to talk about creating change in the media, especially the sports media. I'm thrilled to be here. So I will jump in by telling you a little bit about the story of Stand. Which is a very much nonfiction journey, but often felt to me like a work of fiction when talking about the inequity that we have for women, especially in sports. So I'm just going to share a little bit about Stand with you, and hopefully if you take away anything from this talk, it's that we are all capable of creating change. We don't have to be famous. We don't have to be wealthy. We don't have to be Olympic gold medalists or Instagram influencers. We all have the power to move the dial forward when it comes to making this world a better place, a more equal place. So I'll tell you a little bit. Rachel gave this really kind introduction. She told you a little bit about my journey through ESPN, which really kind of set the stage for what happened next. When I didn't make the Olympics in cycling, what was unbelievable to me was that I actually came very close to making the team, and that ignited this pure passion and love of cycling. But while I was focused on trying to get to the Olympics, I pretty much had that athlete laser focus, but I noticed that behind the scenes, there was a lot of stuff that was wrong or off with cycling that I didn't encounter in other sports that I had played growing up. For instance, women in cycling are not invited to all of the races that men are able to attend. And for the pro level athletes that are able to get to these races, usually the distance was cut in half for the women. And if there was a prize purse on the line in the pro field, it was a fraction of what the men earned. And that never made sense to me. And I remember thinking, why? My journalism brain, why is this happening? And it dawned on me like, okay, maybe this is something I can revisit after my personal athletic quest is done. So when the ESPN assignment was over, I started asking those questions, and there were no answers, and certainly no good answers as to why women were being held back in cycling. So I remember thinking to myself, okay, well, I really want to make it to the professional ranks because maybe then I'll have more of a voice to create change. And if I can make it back into the journalism realms, especially at ESPN, that would be amazing too. Side note, what was happening in 2008 and 2009 was that we were going through a huge economic downturn. The market had crashed, and most of us freelancers were just put on the back burner, So my contract with ESPN was done, and they said, well, we'll get back to you in the future, but right now the market is terrible. So if I was going to chase this pro cycling goal, I had to find a multitude of other careers to be able to chase that dream. I worked adjunct teaching at Pima Community College here in Tucson, and I waitressed, and I trained as hard as I could to make it to the pro ranks of cycling. And I also started pestering ASO, which is Amaury Sport Organization, and it's the owners of the Tour de France. And I was like, I want a meeting with them, and I also want to draft a proposal of how we can have women's inclusion at the Tour de France. It makes no sense that the women's race that they once had back in the 80s was eliminated. So I kept reaching out over email many, many times, just crickets in terms of response. I heard nothing back. So it kind of reinforced, okay, well, maybe if I can get to the pro ranks and I can get that journalism rank back, then maybe then ASO will listen to me. So fast forward to 2012, I was 37 years old, and I landed my first professional contract in professional cycling. This was in many parts a miracle because the governing body of cycling, which is the UCI, Union Cycliste Internationale, they actually had a rule in place where women's professional teams could not average over the age of 28. I was 37. First of all, this rule also makes no sense because science has proven that women are not just capable, but actually excel in endurance sports in their 30s and early 40s. So to have this archaic age rule that was, that had been in effect for so long made no sense. And I remember making a mental note, like, we need to change this. That's just a crazy archaic rule. So 2012, I have my foot in the door of the pro ranks. And also what had happened just at the tail end of 2011 and heading into 2012 was that I was rehired at ESPN as the senior editor of ESPNW, which was their new branch of journalism for women within their network. And, I remember one of the early conversations that I had with my team at ESPN was like, ESPNW shouldn't really exist. Women should be equally included at ESPN and in all realms of sports journalism, as part of the whole, not as a separate entity. We don't have women's front page news. We don't have women's finance, women's lifestyle. In most news areas, men and women are viewed together, and we needed that to happen. That's still a big area that we need to tackle in sports journalism, merge both sides together. So I don't think ESPN really liked that I brought up that we shouldn't have ESPNW when they had just created it. So that meant a little bit of resistance, but I was also thrilled that ESPNW existed because now at least we could showcase and give a platform to the incredible asset we have. So that started, kind of turning the gears for me, thinking, well, in 2012, ESPN's 30 for 30 documentary series was thriving. It was huge. It was relatively new and people were tuning in. And I thought, they only have a few documentaries out there on women, barely any content at all. And this is a perfect opportunity. Now that I'm in the pro cycling ranks and there's never been a documentary on women's pro cycling, what an incredible opportunity to make one. And what I really wanted to do was highlight how awesome the sport is, but also the problems and the inequities that existed so that we could formulate a solution of how we can make the sport better and we can surmount those obstacles. So I brought this idea to my boss at ESPN, and I said, listen, it makes a lot of sense that we put out a documentary, especially now that I'm in the pro ranks. I have access to be able to interview the best of the best in this sport. And I happen to know that their backstories and personal journeys are really fascinating and interesting. So you're going to get tremendous personality coming through. And it's the right thing to do. So what do you think? And I remember she said, direct quote, she said, well, Kathryn, cover your ears, but I mean, does anybody even watch women cycling? To which I responded, no, nobody watches women cycling because there is no platform on which they can watch women cycling. But we're ESPN. We can create that platform. We can give them the visual content so that people can watch this sport. And it floored me a little bit, that was the attitude of it. You can't watch what you can't see. So why not create something so we can see it, And there was this cycle of, oh, well, if no one's watching it, then it must not exist or it must not be worthy. And that's not how it ever should be. Create the platform, put it out there, and, create the demand. It's called supply and demand for a reason. Supply first so you can create the demand. And obviously this message was not getting through to my boss at ESPN. And what it did for me internally was flip this switch, thinking this makes no sense. I know that worldwide, cycling is a very big sport worldwide. It might not yet be as big in North America as it is in other parts of the world, but it's kind of a huge sport. And we need to take a chance here. So I remember thinking, fine, ESPN, if you're not going to make this documentary, I am. And then one day I said that out loud, which means like, oh, I guess I got to do it now. And so in 2012, I started work on what would eventually become Half the Road, the passion, power, and pitfalls of women's pro cycling. And I knew that if I were going to step into this world of documentary filmmaking, obviously I've never made one before. I needed a lot of help and I needed a lot of support. And I found an incredible cinematographer, Kevin Tokstad, and I reached out to, I think at that point I was reaching out on Facebook and Twitter, like, does anybody know how to get something like this off the ground? And I was educated on crowdsourcing, crowdfunding. And eventually what happened was that Half the Road was funded fully by fans of cycling around the world. And what was a really interesting demographic was that it was a worldwide demographic, but what was most interesting was that the film was equally funded by men and women, proving our huge point that exactly that in sports, if you're a fan of a sport, then you want to see men and women at the highest level, play the sport. And that's what was happening, was that the world said, we're fans of cycling. We want to see both men and women. I thought that was an amazing, amazing thing that happened along the way. So now that we had the documentary rolling, I was so excited. I went to our team director. I was racing on Colavita ESPNW team. And I went to our director, a woman that I had looked up to for so many years. Because I think we all know, if we play a sport or whatever goal that we have in life, we always keep tabs on who's above us and how do I get to that level and can I be like them? So there are plenty of women in the sport that I idolized as I was climbing the ranks. And one of these women happened to be the head of our team. She was now a director. She had retired from competing and she was directing. And I looked up to her and I went to her and I said, I'm so excited. I'm so fortunate to be on this team. And behind the scenes, I'm also making this documentary. I'll be able to give cycling a lot more media attention. And I'm also pestering ASO to include women in the Tour de France. So I just hope that, you'll be happy and proud that we're going to get as much visibility to the sport as possible. And what was shocking to me, now kind of stepping into this role of activism, was I thought that every woman would be on my side of creating for women. And unfortunately, I learned a hard lesson that that is not always the case. Some women don't share the same view. Not all women want to see equality in the same context that I did, and I was truly saddened when my director not she I think assumed that this film was either a vanity project in some ways, or she actually said, you know, if you draw attention to the problems in this sport, we're going to lose sponsorship. We're going to lose visibility. And I need you to be quiet, Kathryn. You really have no right talking about cycling in this capacity. You are a nothing. You are a no one. If you keep talking about women's equality and sports, I will bench you for the rest of the year. And that's exactly what she did. I raced one race with the team, and she put me on the bench for the rest of the year. I tried racing individually at races that would allow me to do so, but I was really pretty much blackballed from the team. And it broke my heart a million ways, you know, that especially when you're treated that way by somebody that you look up to. So I just had to cross my fingers and listen to my gut and say, no, we're doing the right thing making this film. And, you know, things will change, things will get better. And as I began making Half the Road, I got to interview some of the greatest stars of the sport. And, you know, in cycling, have amazing, just an amazing wealth of talent. And I was interviewing gold medalists from the Olympics, world champions. So Marianne Vos of the Netherlands, and Emma Pooley of Great Britain, and also Chrissy Wellington, 4-time Ironman world champion. These amazing superstars of sport. Every time I interviewed, you know, anyone, I said, do you want to see women in the Tour de France? Do you want to be in the Tour de France? And they all said, absolutely. Yes, that makes so much sense. That's when I knew that I was onto something. You know, ASO wasn't paying attention to me solely as an individual, but now that I had some star power in my corner, I thought maybe we can band together and effect change as a team, as a group, you know, as an activism group. So we banded together, the four of us, Chrissy and Marianne and Emma and myself, and we created Le Tour Entier, which is French for the whole tour, as in let women in the whole tour. And we put out a petition in July of 2013 asking for a meeting with ASO and you know, so that we could sit down with them and create a Tour de France for women. And that's a very important rule of making change, is that really it's, you know, you don't want to say, hey, you should make some change. You should come to the table and say, no, let's make change together. Here's how we're going to do it. And of course, behind the scenes, it wasn't just a petition, but it was also, you know, a website, a manifesto, a mission, a forward movement. And when we launched the petition, I remember thinking to myself, oh, this is exciting. Maybe we'll get 100 signatures. Maybe we'll get 1,000 signatures. And you have to keep in mind that change.org was relatively new. It had only been around for a few years. And back then, it wasn't as simple as just hitting click. You actually had to sign up, enter some data. And so it wasn't that easy to just, you know, get signature petitions. So here I am hoping we'll get 100, maybe 1,000 if we're lucky. And by the end of that month, we had almost 100,000 signatures. We went on to become one of Change.org's most successful petitions of 2013. It was very exciting. But what also happened was this media frenzy of, oh my gosh, you know, what's going to happen? Is ASO going to finally concede to a meeting and to getting women in the Tour de France? What was also very funny is that ASO, they did not like that petition at all. Probably also because I had checked the box that allowed the head of Tour de France to receive an email every time someone signed the petition. He probably didn't like that. But hey, when you got to create change, do whatever you can. So I thought that was really, really interesting to me. Oh, hang on. We have a visitor. So sorry, this is Persistence the cat. She is actually part of this journey. She kept showing up at the Homestretch house, just meowing at the front door, saying, I live here, I live here. She had been abandoned by the former renter, and so we took her in. And she is the first official resident of Homestretch Foundation, which I'll tell you about a little bit later. So I also can't promise that she won't jump into my lap and or knock off the laptop. So bear with me on that. Cats and conferences. Oh my gosh. Okay, so back to the story. We launched the petition, and the world went wild, and the media was paying attention for it. And ASO behind the scenes agreed to a secret meeting, and it's very funny to me that they put a gag order on us, that they didn't want any of us talking about this meeting they were going to have with us, because they wanted any change that was going to happen at the Tour de France to be their idea, not the idea of others. And this goes along with many of the hidden figures that we have in history. A lot of women are behind the scenes or silenced in some capacity. And I remember giggling about that, thinking, well, 100,000 people signed the petition, so so they're going to know someday, but we don't need our names attached to this. And besides, if you silence me, ASO, then you're just furthering my idea to write a book about it all someday. Good luck silencing that. So, long story short, we had this secret meeting with them, and they agreed that they would create a race for women at the Tour de France. And we pretty much sat with them, and I would say we did the lion's share of the work behind the scenes. And what was happening was that, this was October of 2013. And by July of 2014, we had the first official La Course by Tour de France. And this was a really big achievement. Not ESPN. ASO started with 1 day for women because they needed it to be proven to them that people would tune in and watch this race. They were a little bit too nervous to give women 2 to 3 weeks all at once. So but the big victory with this achievement was that the Tour de France fully recognized and included women and let them use the name Tour de France. Back in the 80s, when there had been a race and they canceled the women's race, they also rescinded the right for women to start a new race called the Tour de France. They said, nope, women don't have access to the title of the Tour de France. So for me, that was really a big deal, that not just for me, but for everyone, that the Tour de France now included women and gave ownership of the name to both parties. So that was a big deal. What was also happening, though, behind the scenes was that the team that I was on for 2013, I raced a second year with Colavita for 2013. And at the end of the year, that was the year that I was benched. And at the end of the year, they dropped me. This director didn't want anything to do with me anymore. And so I started 2014 without a team, and it was pretty devastating, to be dropped because she considered me a rabble rouser. And then what actually ended up happening was that in June of 2014, a team picked me up because I was a rabble rouser. And they said, no, we appreciate that women will now be able to race the Tour de France, and you need to be there. We want you on this team, and we want you to take part in this race. So I was signed by the 8th ranked team in the world, Wiggle Honda Pro Cycling, a British team. And I was absolutely beside myself, thrilled with this. So I got to stand on the start line of my dreams on July 27th, 2014. And as it turned out, the team that dropped me, well, they didn't actually qualify for the Tour de France. And hey, it's interesting sometimes what happens with karma. And it was a firm reminder that maybe it was the right thing to do, sticking with my gut, And that was also the year that Half the Road came out. And we had a sold out premiere for Half the Road. And then we got picked up by international distribution, which was pretty amazing. And then I think, got accepted at 10 film festivals, and we ended up winning 3 of those, which was really remarkable. And even to this day, we're out, Half the Road is out there on, let's see, iTunes, Vimeo, Amazon Prime, and, I still receive royalty checks for a film that is 7 years old, a film that is still relevant, and a film that ESPN once said no one will watch. So, karma, again, sometimes will reward us when we stick to our gut and we do the right thing, especially if it has to deal with that gender inclusion. That's a big deal. So that's a little bit of the first part of Stand, the book. But behind the scenes, now we're going to kind of turn the corner a little bit into the reality of what actually truly happens with standing on the front lines of change. Is that, well, a lot of stuff can happen in your personal life too. A lot of things can change along with your public realm of activism, and I wasn't immune to that. Amazing things were happening in terms of equality and women and sport, but my personal life was suffering from a lot of what was happening behind the scenes. And I'll keep that on the brief side for now, because I think we're going to get into more of that in the Q&A. But really, I came to this understanding that it's a journey. When we stand up and fight for what we want, our personal lives sometimes change as well. And so one of the most important things that we can do is to surround ourselves with people who support our mission, who, agree with this platform for change, and to take comfort and solace in those who support us when things start to turn the corner and go to bad, dark places. I had no idea that so much would change in my private life. And, I'm okay now, I'm good now. But this was, I would not have been able to write this book in 2014. There was so much happening behind the scenes, and I really needed some time to heal and process what it is to affect change. And now I'm in a good place. And I when I decided to write Stand, I will share with you that I sat down to write the first draft in, it was 2016, and I had to stop for 2 reasons. One was I was still racing professionally, and I endured a really pretty horrific crash with a really big brain injury that almost killed me on the spot. I'm very lucky that I survived that, after then spent 3 weeks in the hospital. A year later, doctors were able to give me the okay that I can now say that I'm just as weird as I ever was, and I am very, very thankful for that. But also because of that injury, I had to put down writing the book, which ended up to be a very good choice, because that first draft that I had written, I thought I would just talk about the activism side, like how we can be an activist, how we can fight for change, do this, it'll be great. And it was probably the worst draft of anything that I've ever written, because it didn't give the whole picture. It didn't talk about the vulnerability or the humanity that goes into, trying to be our authentic selves when we stand up for change. So it was a crappy draft. I threw that out. Then I needed to rest for another year to let my brain heal. Started the book up again in 2017, and decided at that point I'm going to write about the personal stuff too, the tough stuff. So I put that in, and if you choose to read Stan, you'll probably know more about me than you could ever want to. And for better or for worse, I still hope that what you'll take away is that in the back there is an actual manual using all of my successes and also my not successes. I won't call them failures, but all of the things that didn't work. Those are the most important teaching elements when it comes to creating change. Like, what didn't work can be just as important at what in terms of how we move forward. So that's all in there. And, I'm excited where we are. I mentioned too, before I add this over to the Q&A part, I should tell you about Homestretch Foundation. As I mentioned, when the cat jumped into my lap. So Homestretch Foundation, partner and I created in 2017 when I retired from pro cycling. There were still a lot of inequities, and one of those was the salary wage gap between pro men and pro women. At the highest level, the world tour level, men received a base salary of about $40,000, and then obviously earned thousands to millions more on top of that, but at least there was a base salary. And for the women, women were deemed not to deserve a base salary. Verbatim quote back from 2013, and we knew we had to change this. So behind the scenes, we fought for women to receive a base salary, but in the interim, we wanted to make sure that women who are at the professional level of cycling had a place where they could come and train and live for free. So we created Homestretch Foundation. It's a compound in Tucson, Arizona, which is a hotbed for cycling, especially pro cycling. And athletes can apply to be here so we can help them, sift through their pay gap issues, not having to pay rent, etc. And to this day, we've been around for about 5 years. We've helped 70 athletes from 17 different countries. And in 2020, the UCI issued a base salary mandate for women at the World Tour level. So happy we got that done. And in the meantime, I got to witness the growth of amazing athletes come through our program, and one very persistent cat. So on that note, I would love to turn this over to Rachel and to anybody who might have any questions about, creating change.
Great. Wow. That's really a remarkable story, Kathryn. Every time I hear it, and I've read the book and we've had conversations, but I'm still so engrossed. So I hope that it was really meaningful for the audience as well. But quickly, to just get us jumped into the questions here, I wanted to ask you, brass tacks, what is your vision of equality in sports, and why is it important? You've talked a lot about this in your conversation in bits and pieces, but just, concisively, why is this important?
Right. So the most important thing is that sports is just an arm, a branch, an extension of our society, right? And that is why inclusion and diversity and equal opportunity is so important, because it's not really about sports. It's about how we treat other people in society. So for me, that's the biggest element of why we have to create change. And as we know, sports is very much a male-dominated field and usually steeped in traditionalism. We've seen some huge strides in women's tennis. It's a great example. As where it was in the 70s as to where it is now. And we need to make sure that all the sports have that opportunity to move forward as tennis did, for women. So brass tacks, it's all about creating equal opportunity places where women can achieve and succeed. And of course, part of that brass tacks, vision is that we also need equal media coverage. That's the big one. It's one thing to let women into a race per se, but if you're not going to turn the cameras on them, then is it equal? Absolutely not.
Great. Yeah. And I think a point of distinction that comes to my mind here is this discussion and this conversation of equality versus equity. And I would say, for example, the course still goes on to this day, which is remarkable achievement, but it's also still a single day race, I believe, which obviously was not your activist group's intention at all. And in this sort of journey, I think you talk in the book about really some of the principles of teamwork. And I don't mean compromise in terms of compromising, what you desire to achieve, but as part of the process. And I think you all agreed that on the first year it made sense. One day, maybe ASO was thinking of it as a way to test the waters. You all were thinking of it more practically. the race was less than a year away, the logistics of rolling that out. But fair enough, let's go for one day. You knew it would, it would blow everything out of the water, and then move forward and logistically maybe add a few days each year until ultimately you had this equitable race. Anyway, I guess my question to you on this front of kind of equality and equity is, you were going to achieve equity, or your aim was to achieve equity, to have the same race, regardless of the gender. So what happened, and why did this stall from your perspective?
Great question. You could say that we had both equity and equality on that one day at the Tour de France, and we still do for that one day. But no, that definitely doesn't stack up to equity in the sense that women are not racing the remaining 20 days that are part of the Tour de France, right? What happened was this: when we brought this to the table, we understood that creating a 3-week Tour de France for women was not realistic or feasible financially or schedule-wise, with just that 7-month window that we had back then. But we suggested that what you need to do is, we got our foot in the door, we got one day for the first year, and then that we would add 3 to 5 days incrementally for the remaining years until we reached full equity. And ASO, in the beginning, oh yes, we'll do that. Great idea. And what's amazing is that the one day of La Course by Tour de France, it did everything that we knew it would. The visibility of it was huge. It streamed in 125 countries on 50 different networks, channels, streaming devices, and the public loved it. The advertisers got their money's worth. All of the support behind it was huge. So ASO saw a return of investment on that day, financially, and also, of course, morally and socially. It was a big hit. The fans, I was there, the fans loved it. Some fans even came to the women's race. They didn't really care so much about the men's race. They're like, we're here to watch the women. This is historic. It was awesome. So ASO got their money's worth. And the fact that they broke their promise and they have not incrementally added days since then, I can tell you that it boils down to apathy, sexism, and laziness. Because if the dollars are there, the fans want it, and the athletes want it, then what's the reason? Well, that's the reason. They're not doing what they said they would. But what I love is that the media and other pro cyclists are now calling them out, saying, hey, you did not progress the way that you should have done, where we should be now. Like, you're in the wrong on this. Fix it. So we have a lot more voices speaking out now. And so we do expect to see change, and we won't stop until we do.
I just want to take this moment to remind the audience that we can take questions from you. So you can submit them via the Slido tab on the right of your panel. And also, I'm not sure if there are any questions that have come in yet, but just ask the moderators behind the scenes if they have any for us. Maybe they can queue those up. And in the meantime, maybe I'll ask one more for you here, because you did talk in the book, less so in this talk, about the vulnerability, other than hinting at it. But I think that it's funny, when you and I talked about this a few weeks ago, and I was trying to give you an idea of what I thought would resonate with the audience. And I had not read the book yet, full disclosure here at that point. So I said to you, well, what I really love about this is you're just a normal person. You're just like us. You're not this celebrity. You're not this, famous athlete. And I meant that in a very sort of kindred spirit way, that it was relatable. And that's why I think this is an important story. And then little did I know, that's exactly the story that you tell, which is, and what you kind of started off here, is that I'm just like you. Anyone has the capacity to do this. But I think what makes your story really powerful in the book, I have my book here still, is the vulnerability. Because like you said, you started out with a version, it was really just the exterior, and it was pretty dull because it's just, I don't know, the kind of the foundation. But what really brings this home is that vulnerability. And what I think is important here is that storytelling component. And, we here, and probably a lot of our audience are in LA. We are the the heart of storytelling land. So I think this is something key. And I want to talk to you a little bit about the importance of storytelling as part of activism and maybe as that way to connect, because lots of data exists. You talk about it in the book. We all hear it and we know it. Data that says that, women have the capabilities to perform, etc., kind of on equal ground. But data alone hasn't been powerful enough to bring the necessary change, not just to sports, but to a lot of industries that are struggling with diversity and equality. So, how can we use that emotional connection and that storytelling to create change?
Such a great question. I think that we humans always gravitate and relate to other humans who show a little bit of vulnerability and connection. And I think that that is such an important key. In the book I talk, and I'm okay talking about this because like my life's an open book. So, it's good to be able to talk about this and share. One of the biggest struggles that I went through as all of this stuff was coming together, La Course and Half the Road, and I had a book coming out back then. Things were all coming together. And in that moment, very unexpectedly, my husband left. And he had been my rock, my support, the person that I could always turn to when things weren't going right. And all of a sudden, poof, he was gone. And I had to wear this very, very brave face of activism to the public. I was getting tons of interviews about La Course and what was happening and what was coming, big time media. And so I had to put on that face of like, oh yes, this is great, this is right, this is everything. But on the flip side, I was completely broken and falling apart and going down a very dangerous road of depression. All of that I do talk openly about in Stand. I even tested the waters a little bit when Bicycling Magazine did an interview in 2016, and they said, we really want to know what happens behind the scenes. And I remember thinking, oof, wow, I'm going to have to answer some really honest questions if I'm going to be authentic and true about this journey. And what happened in 2016 was how many people started writing in after I shared those difficult times of divorce and depression, and really diving into the mental health component of it was so scary for me. And what happened was that strangers started reaching out saying, oh my gosh, I feel a connection now to know that I'm not alone with somebody else who struggles. And the fact that you are open and vulnerable to share that, like I struggle with stuff too, but I thought I was the only one. And now that I know that you struggle, that actually helps me. And I was getting this type of feedback from people who actually, they weren't cyclists, or they didn't have a strong, affiliation to creating change for women. But it was just natural human beings reaching out to talk to me about this or write me a note or an email. So that was huge. And I think that's actually what gave me the courage to say, okay, well, maybe if I was able to do this article, maybe I could write a book about this. And now that Stand's been out for about not quite a month, it just released in early February, but I'm starting to get some emails and some social media, comments about people being able to create, to connect with the vulnerability aspect. You know what they're also saying though, and to answer your question, Rachel, is basically that they're saying, now I have an understanding that my vulnerability is one thing, but I can also create change. Like if you did it, then I can. And now I'm just a little bit more aware of the vulnerability side of it, but I can do what you did. And that makes me so happy. It's for others to know that they can step onto the front lines. And I should say this, not everybody has to step on the front lines to create change. There are plenty of people who don't want to be the lead figure, or the voice or the talking head, right? And that's okay. There are plenty of ways that you can help by using whatever your skill set might be. And you don't have to necessarily be on the front lines, but you can band together with others. You can join groups, say, I want to be a part of this. Here's my skill set. What can I do? And, that's a big deal. So I want people to know that they don't always have to put themselves in the same position that I was in, the talking head, so to speak.
Yeah. I think this is a great segue to a question we just got in from the audience. And this question, if you could answer it in the context of a big chunk of our audience here are the students and faculty at Anderson, the business school at UCLA, and also within the industry of sports and entertainment. So how would you convince someone to take on a major challenge or risk as you have, as opposed to taking the safe route?
Great question. And thank you for all the students. You guys, you're our future. So I'm so glad that you're here today. Okay, so the first and foremost ingredient for me was to create a team. As you know from the story, nothing really happened when I started trying to affect change by myself. And it wasn't until we had a group, an actual, a team. So I would advise, when you find that element where you want to create change, find a few other people. And I say a few because I think a group of 3 or 4 is so much more manageable than casting this wide net, and then you have hundreds of people who are like, I support you. But it's sometimes too many works against us. It's easier to get something off the ground when you have a little nucleus. You can bring more people in later. So test the waters, put it out there to your friends, your colleagues, social media even, and say what it is that you stand for, what you want to do, and who'd like to work with me on this. And it's amazing the responses that you'll get back. And from that, create that team. So, and it's nice too. Then you know that you're not alone, and that helps with the vulnerability aspect as well. You got some people to lean on. And so I would definitely say that is the number one key goal. And the other part too is that activism. So you have to make sure that you don't get discouraged along the way, and you keep at it. Things can change, things will happen. It might not be on the timeline that you prefer, especially in this modern day and age where everything seems so instantaneous. Not always the case with activism. Mm-hmm. Trying to change tradition takes a long time. So keep moving forward, but take breaks when you need to, because that's where the mental health component comes in. If activism becomes your whole life and something over here isn't working or something over here isn't working and you're so tunnel visioned, then that can be destructive in the end. So make sure that you prioritize your well-being first.
No, I think that's great, and really truly the embodiment. And I think the thing that has come to the working world from sports is the perhaps cliche but true saying of teamwork makes the dream work. And I think that's really critical. And cycling, as much as it's individual participants, it's very much a team sport. You talk about that as well in the book in terms of the roles and how you work together. Those who are in cycling know I think some of the principles of the peloton, but and the breakaways and that sort of thing. But it's more in the book. So I know we're getting close to time here. We were generously given a little bit of extra time. So I have kind of a closeout question for you, and I'll pose this to you. And then if there's anyone who wants to ask anything else, one more after that, feel free to submit it. But otherwise, we'll end with this one. So, all of this journey has been documented in this new book. You've also written books in the past, but this, of course, this one couldn't be easy either for you. There were, in a strange sort of parallel to the story you were telling, you got a lot of pushback from the publishing industry about the perhaps lack of interest in anyone hearing, this woman's story. So can you tell us just what was this, you had the story you wanted to tell, but you ran into these challenges. So what, which was kind of a deja vu experience, like what did you have to do to make this book? And I think you probably have some lessons, that are worthy of sharing with this community from that as well.
Thank you, Rachel. I have to tell you, it's remarkable that the journey, the content that's in Stand was the exact same struggle that I had to go through in the publishing industry. So my first 3 books were all traditionally published by corporate publishing houses like Random House, ESPN, Little Brown, the big boxes of publishing. So I have a literary agent, and when we shopped the proposal for Stand, and what a book proposal is, it's the idea of what the book will be. And it is what gets you into the door of the publisher, and that's when you receive an advance. If your book is accepted or if your proposal is accepted, you get an actual financial advance to sit down and write that book, which is very important because then it becomes your full-time job, right? So that's what happened with my 3 previous books. And so now I've got my agent and I'm thinking, okay, well, this is the 4th book. It won't be that hard to land a contract. And also books about women who stand up and fight for change. I mean, the time is now. We're seeing this in our politics. We're seeing this in our society. So here I am thinking, like, this fits. This is the right time to do this. And what happened was that we received 25 rejections from all the corporate entities, and they all said the same thing. They're like, oh yeah, okay, Bertine, she can write, she's all right. But this subject, it won't sell. Book about women who stand up and fight for change, not marketable, won't sell, don't bother. And then my favorite one was, they said, there's no room on the shelf. And I was like, really? There's no room on the shelf of the internet? Oh no, what are we gonna do? And at that point, it really, it hurt to have this topic rejected. And I remember thinking, well, I have 2 choices. One is that I don't write the book ever. It just goes away. Second is that I write it. I found my own publishing label and I put it out there independently. So that's what we did. I founded New Shelf Press and make sure that we know that shelves, exist and these types of books belong on these shelves. And the internet is not too small. So I then did the same thing that I did with the film and with the petition. I founded a team of people. I reached out. I hired an editor, a copy editor, a tech guru for actually uploading the book into all the proper formats, and a graphic designer for the cover. And we became Team Stand, and now there are a lot more members of Team Stand because everybody who is out there buying this book is proving to those corporate entities that, oh no, books like this do belong on the shelf. We should always have a shelf for people who stand up and fight for change. And what I love is that in independent publishing, there's a stat that says most independent books will only sell about 200 copies, 250 copies in a lifetime. Well, it's been less than a month and we're at about 2,000 copies sold. And in traditional publishing, they consider 2,000 to 3,000 a successful book. So we're storming forward, marching forward, and we're going to shatter those stereotypes of corporate publishing as Team Stand. And I'm kind of loving that this part of the journey is happening, but it's also very disappointing to think that, the corporate world thought that this topic wasn't going to be marketable, but they thought that about half the road too. So if we proved them wrong there, we'll prove them wrong again.
Well, Kathryn, I think we're about out of time. So thank you so much for sharing about your story, through cycling, through activism, through publishing. I've really enjoyed reading this book. If anyone is interested in learning more about Kathryn's story in something that I felt like kind of read like a fictional screenplay, really, in a good way, but in a shocking way that this is real life, you should definitely check out the book. Here it is. I got lots of markers in it. There was a lot of good insights, a lot of relatability. And like you said, at the very end, you did distill it down into a practical manual with steps and actions that can be taken in activism. So to the person who asked the question before about, how to move forward and make change, you might want to check it out because I think there's a lot of really you did a great job of distilling it down into that. That's the manual portion. So anyway, thank you again. This was wonderful. Everyone can find out more about you. You're on all of the various social media channels. Please check out Kathryn. I look forward to what's next in your journey because I'm sure it's not over.
Rachel, thank you. And you can easily find Stand wherever books are sold. It's out there on barnesandnoble.com, amazon.com, and your local bookshop can order it for you. So if you like locally, just call it in and they'll order it for you.